The hollow in the woods. I should have turned back the moment I stepped into those woods. Something in my gut told me it was a mistake, but I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid. Now, as I sit here in the dark, my back pressed against the rough bark of an ancient tree, I know that gut feeling was right. I was never supposed to leave. It started as a simple camping trip. Just me and my closest friend, Daniel. We had talked for weeks about getting away from the noise of the city, from the constant buzz of technology and stress. Daniel had suggested the deep woods, a dense and mostly unexplored stretch of forest miles away from the nearest town. He claimed it was untouched, pristine, perfect for an escape. The first day was uneventful. We set up camp near a shallow creek, the sound of trickling water providing a peaceful backdrop to our conversations. As night fell, we built a fire and swapped stories, letting the flames cast strange shadows against the towering trees. It was perfect until we heard the first noise. A whisper. It came from somewhere beyond the fire's glow, just past the tree line. A soft, almost inaudible murmur, like a voice carried by the wind. Daniel laughed it off, claiming it was the breeze whistling through the trees, but I wasn't so sure. Something about it felt deliberate, intentional. I barely slept that night. The next day, we decided to explore deeper into the forest. We packed light, bringing only what we needed for a few hours of hiking. But as we ventured further, the atmosphere shifted. The sunlight, which had been warm and golden near our camp, struggled to pierce through the thick canopy. The trees grew gnarled and twisted, their bark blackened as if scorched by fire long ago. The air smelled wrong, damp and heavy, laced with something metallic. Then we found the hollow. At first, it looked like a natural depression in the forest floor, a sunken patch of earth surrounded by thick roots. But as we stepped closer, we saw it for what it really was, a pit. A perfect circle, maybe 10 feet across, its edges smooth as if something had carefully carved it into the ground. The soil inside was darker than the rest of the forest floor, almost black, and at the very center, a small opening yawned downward into nothingness. A feeling of unease crept up my spine. I didn't want to go near it, but Daniel, ever the adventurous one, was already stepping closer, peering into the void. "There's something down there," he said. His voice sounded off, distant. I grabbed his arm. "We should go." He shook me off. "Just 1 second. I think I see." Then he was gone. One moment he was standing at the edge of the pit, and the next, the ground beneath him collapsed with a sickening crack. He barely had time to shout before he was swallowed by the darkness below. Panic surged through me. I dropped to my knees, scrambling to the edge. "Daniel!" No response. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling as I pointed the beam down into the pit. The light barely penetrated the inky darkness, revealing only a smooth, steep tunnel sloping into the earth. It looked unnatural, too perfect, like something had made it. Then the whispering returned. Not from the forest, from the hole. I froze. The murmurs slithered up the tunnel, curling around me like invisible tendrils. The voices overlapped, growing louder, more desperate. I swore I could hear Daniel's voice among them, but it was distorted, wrong. "Help me." It was him, but it wasn't. I should have run then. I should have turned my back on that awful place and never looked back. But instead, I called out again, hoping, praying. The whispers stopped. Then something moved. Deep in the tunnel, something shifted. The darkness pulsed, like a living thing inhaling. My flashlight flickered. The air grew thick, suffocating. And then I saw it. A hand. No, not a hand. The shape of a hand, but stretched, elongated, its fingers too many, too thin. It rose from the darkness, grasping at the dirt, pulling something massive behind it. I ran. I don't remember how I found my way back to camp. My legs moved on their own, my body driven by sheer terror. I crashed through the underbrush, branches slashing at my arms and face. The whispering followed me, growing louder, more urgent. By the time I reached the tent, my mind was a blur of fear. I grabbed my pack, yanked it over my shoulder, and sprinted. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The forest blurred around me as I ran, my breath ragged, my heart a wild drumbeat in my chest. When I finally burst free of the woods, the world felt wrong. The sky was too dark, the trees looming, watching. My car sat where we left it, but something inside me screamed that I wasn't safe yet. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition, twisting it so hard I thought it might snap. The engine roared to life. I slammed the gas pedal. The trees blurred past me as I sped away, the road winding, twisting, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out. I didn't stop until I was miles away. I called the authorities the next morning. A search party was sent into the deep woods. They found our campsite. They found our tracks. But they didn't find the hollow. And they didn't find Daniel. It's been 3 months now. I still hear the whispers at night. Faint, just outside my window, weaving through the wind, calling me back. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the hand, crawling out of the dark, reaching for me. And I know that whatever lives in the hollow isn't finished with me yet. Into the deep woods. I should have never taken that job. I keep telling myself that over and over, like a chant, like a prayer that might undo everything. But it's too late now. Started a month ago when I was desperate for work. Living in a city where rent drained my pockets dry, I jumped at an opportunity to be a caretaker for a remote cabin in the deep woods. The job sounded simple. Maintain the property, keep the generator running, and make sure the wildlife didn't get too close. The pay was good, almost too good, and the solitude? That was a bonus. I arrived at the cabin just before dusk, the late October air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The cabin itself was old but sturdy, with dark wooden walls and windows that looked like sunken eyes. The man who hired me, a gruff old guy named Turner, gave me a single warning before he left. Stay inside at night. Don't go looking for things that don't want to be found. I laughed nervously, but Turner's face didn't shift. He meant it. For the first few nights, everything was fine. The silence was thick, wrapping around the cabin like a smothering blanket, but I welcomed it. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Then, on the 4th night, I heard it. A whisper came from the woods, just beyond the tree line. Soft, almost melodic, but undeniably human. I froze, straining to hear. Maybe it was the wind, playing tricks on my ears. But then I heard it again. A voice, too faint to understand, calling from somewhere in the darkness. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But the next night, the voice came again, closer. This time, I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and forced myself to ignore it. I barely slept, every creak of the cabin making my skin crawl. When dawn finally broke, I stepped outside, scanning the treeline. Nothing, but something felt off. The forest, usually alive with birdsong in the morning, was eerily silent. I tried to shake the unease, chalking it up to isolation getting to me. But on the 7th night, I saw it. The figure. It stood just beyond the tree line, half hidden in the shadows. Tall and thin, its arms hanging at unnatural angles. First, I thought it was a person, but then it moved. Or rather, it didn't move so much as it shifted like a glitch in reality. The whispering started again. Not from the figure, but from all around me. From the trees, from the ground, from the walls of the cabin itself. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut. The whispering continued, wrapping around the cabin like a living thing. My breath came in short gasps as I backed away from the door, my body screaming at me to run. But run where? Then suddenly silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, heart hammering in my chest. When I finally gathered the courage to peek through the curtains, the figure was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found footprints outside. But they weren't human. They were elongated, twisted, like something had dragged itself through the dirt. They led away from the cabin and deep into the woods. I should have left then, packed my bags and run. But some stupid part of me needed to know what was out there. I followed the tracks. They wound through the trees, leading me deeper into the forest than I had ever gone before. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. And then I found the clearing. It was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. The trees bent inward, their trunks warped and twisted. In the center of the clearing was a hole, a yawning black void in the earth. The footprints led straight into it. That's when I heard my own voice, calling from the hole. "Help me?" It whispered, an exact copy of my voice. "I'm stuck. Please." My stomach turned to ice. I ran. Branches tore at my skin, the whispering growing louder behind me. The trees themselves seemed to shift, closing in, trying to keep me there. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. When I finally burst from the treeline, the cabin was in sight. But standing on the porch was Turner. His face was grim. "You went looking, didn't you?" I couldn't answer. I just nodded, my breath ragged. Turner sighed, rubbing a hand over his weathered face. "It's got your voice now. It'll call to you, try to trick you." I opened my mouth to ask what it was, but then I heard it again. My own voice, drifting from the woods. "Please, come back." Turner shook his head. "Pack your things. You're leaving." I didn't argue. I was gone before the sun set. But even now, miles away from those cursed woods, I still hear it. My own voice, calling to me, begging me to return. The Watchers in the Woods. I always told myself I'd never go back to Black Hollow Forest. As kids, my older cousin, Jake, and I used to explore the deep woods behind our grandfather's cabin. We'd run through the trees, pretending to be explorers, scaring each other with ghost stories. But one summer, when I was 12 and Jake was 14, something happened out there. Something neither of us ever talked about. Now, 17 years later, I was back. I had no choice. Jake had disappeared. The vanishing. He'd been missing for 3 days when I got the call from his sister. The police had found his truck parked at the trailhead leading into Black Hollow. Engine dead, doors wide open. His gear was still in the back. No sign of struggle, no footprints leading into the trees. The search teams found nothing, but I knew where he'd gone. There was a place deep in the woods, far off any marked trail, where the trees grew impossibly tall, their trunks gnarled and twisted. We called it the Hollow. It was the last place we ever explored together, the place that changed everything. If Jake had gone back there, I had to find him. The descent into Black Hollow. I arrived at the trailhead just before dusk. The air was thick, humid, carrying the scent of damp earth. The moment I stepped off the main path, a heavy silence settled around me. No birds, no insects, no wind, just like before. I followed the faint trail deeper, branches clawing at my arms, the underbrush growing denser with every step. It felt like the woods were trying to stop me. And then I saw it, the first marker, a crudely carved symbol in the bark of a tree. A circle with jagged lines stretching outward like sun rays, but wrong. I ran my fingers over the carving. It was fresh. Jake had been here. I pressed on, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The deeper I went, the darker it got. The trees bent inward, their branches knitting together to block out the sky. Shadows stretched unnaturally, moving even when I stood still. Then, the air changed. The smell hit me first. Rot, like something long dead, hidden beneath layers of leaves and soil. And beneath that, something worse, something sweet. I gagged, covering my mouth as I stumbled into a clearing. And that's when I saw them, the hanging things, dozens of figures, wrapped in dried, crumbling skin, hanging from the trees. Their bodies were skeletal, stretched too thin, as if they had been hollowed out from the inside. I stepped closer, my breath hitching. They weren't human. Their limbs were too long, fingers ending in sharpened points. Their faces were smooth, featureless, except for deep, gaping mouths stretched wide open, as if frozen in a silent scream. The moment my foot crunched over a twig, they moved, not all at once, just shifting, a slow, unnatural sway, like marionettes dangling from invisible strings. I stumbled back, my pulse slamming against my ribs. And then, from behind me, a whisper, "You shouldn't have come back." I spun around. Jake stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the trees. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, but it was him. He stepped forward, his lips barely moving. "They know you're here, _ Something cracked behind me. I turned just in time to see one of the hanging figures drop from the tree. The chase, it didn't hit the ground. It caught itself, landing on all fours in a crouch, its elongated limbs bending at impossible angles. And then it turned its head toward me. I ran. Branches whipped against my face, my feet barely touching the ground. The air behind me churned with the sound of movement. Too fast, too many legs, too close. Jake was ahead of me now, leading me deeper into the woods. I didn't question it. I just ran. The whispers followed, surrounding me, pressing into my ears. "We see you! We see you!" A shape darted past in my periphery. Something tall, watching from the trees. Another skittered alongside me, its limbs clicking against the bark. The path ahead split in two. Jake took the left. I hesitated for half a second. Then a hand, cold, clawed, brushed against my back. I followed Jake. The hollow. We burst into another clearing, this one smaller, encased by massive, ancient trees. In the center was a massive hole, a yawning black pit in the earth, wide as a house, its edges lined with more of those twisted symbols. Jake skidded to a stop, panting. "They won't cross," he rasped. "Not here." I turned, my chest heaving. The things had stopped at the treeline, silent, still, watching. I swallowed hard. "What the hell are they?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "They were people. Once." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "How do you know that?" Jake didn't answer. His gaze flickered to the pit. "We have to go in." I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Are you insane?" It's the only way out." A rustling sound behind me. I turned. One of the creatures had stepped forward. It didn't attack. It lifted a hand and pointed at the pit. And then, in my own voice, it whispered, "You already belong to us." The descent. I don't remember making the decision. One second I was standing there. The next I was falling. The pit swallowed us whole. Darkness. Cold. And then, I woke up. The return. I was lying at the edge of the main trail, just outside Black Hollow. The sky was bright. Birds were chirping. Jake was gone. I searched for days. I told the police everything, but they found nothing. No pit, no symbols, no creatures. But I know what I saw, and every night, when the house is quiet, I hear it. A whisper from the woods. "You should have stayed." The hollow ones. I never wanted to go into those woods. It was my brother, Kevin, who convinced me. "Just one night, Danny," he'd said, shoving a camping backpack into my hands. "One night in the deep woods. No phones, no distractions, just us and nature." I should have said no, but Kevin had a way of making things sound exciting, and honestly, I missed him. Ever since he moved out of state, we barely saw each other. A weekend camping trip sounded like a great way to catch up, until we got there. I remember the exact moment I realized we had gone too far. The dirt trail we followed was barely visible, swallowed by towering trees and thick underbrush. The deeper we hiked, the quieter the world became. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the hum of insects. Just an eerie, unnatural silence. I hesitated. "Kev, maybe we should camp closer to the main trail." He grinned, oblivious. "Where's the fun in that? Come on, we're almost there." There was no arguing with Kevin, so I followed. The trees grew denser, their gnarled roots twisting like skeletal fingers over the forest floor. The air smelled stale, damp with decay. Every step felt like a mistake. Then we found the clearing, the hollow clearing. It was unnatural, too perfect. A circular patch of land, void of trees, as if something had scorched them away. The ground was bare, save for a few scattered bones. Animal, I told myself. Just animal bones. Kevin dropped his bag and stretched. This is it. Feels different, huh? I swallowed hard. Yeah, different. We set up camp, but something gnawed at me. I felt watched, like unseen eyes pressed against my skin. Shadows moved strangely between the trees, stretching in ways that didn't match the fading sunlight. That night, as we sat by the fire, Kevin told a story. Ever heard about the Hollow Ones? He asked, poking at the flames. I shook my head. He grinned. Legend says there's something in these woods. Not ghosts, not animals. Something else. They were once people, but they stayed here too long. The forest took them, hollowed them out. Now, they walk the woods, looking for others to join them. I forced a chuckle. Great bedtime story, Kev. But he wasn't laughing. I didn't sleep that night. The whispers. Sometime after midnight, I heard it. Whispering. It came from the trees, soft and rhythmic, like wind through hollow bones. Kevin was fast asleep, undisturbed. I sat up, straining to listen. The whispers weren't random, they were words. Come deeper, come see. My breath hitched. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it into the trees. Something moved. A dark figure, just beyond the reach of the light. I scrambled back, heart pounding. Kevin? I hissed, shaking him awake. He groaned. What? There's something out there. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. Probably a deer. No, I whispered. It was watching us. Kevin sighed and grabbed his flashlight. Fine, I'll check. Before I could stop him, he stepped toward the treeline. His light cut through the dark, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no rustling, just silence. Kevin smirked. See? Just your imagination. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. Something waiting. The markings. The next morning, Kevin was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, his backpack still there. No footprints leading away. Just gone. I called his name. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and started searching. I found the first marking on a tree near our campsite. A hollowed-out face, carved deep into the bark. Its mouth was stretched wide, as if screaming. Further ahead, another, then another. Each face twisted in agony, eyes black voids. And then, I found Kevin's knife, stuck into the trunk of a tree. I turned, pulse hammering. The woods were silent. Then whispers. Deeper. Come see. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, but the trees seemed to close in, shifting, twisting. The path I came from was gone. The whispers grew louder, and then I saw him. Kevin stood in the distance, half hidden behind a tree. Kevin! I gasped, stumbling toward him. He didn't move. Something was wrong. His skin looked pale, stretched too tight over his face. His eyes hollow. He smiled, but it wasn't Kevin's smile. Come deeper. I turned and ran. The Hollow Ones. The whispers followed me. Shapes moved between the trees, figures shifting in the periphery of my vision. I tripped, crashing to the forest floor. When I looked up, they were surrounding me. Pale figures, hollow-eyed, their bodies thin and stretched like old leather. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. Only the endless whispering, swirling inside my skull. Then, Kevin stepped forward. Or what used to be Kevin. His voice was soft, almost kind. You don't have to run, Danny. You just have to let go. I screamed. The escape. I don't remember how I got out. I remember running until my lungs burned. I remember the trees thinning, morning light breaking through, and then silence. I collapsed onto the main road, gasping for air. A passing hiker found me, called the police. I told them everything. They searched for Kevin. They never found him. The final warning. It's been 6 months. I don't go near the woods anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers outside my window. Soft, gentle, calling me back. And last night, when I looked in the mirror, my eyes looked a little too hollow.